Hello Revolution students, and welcome back to another video on the Chinese Revolution area of study 2. In this video we are going to look at Lin Biao and how he contributed to the creation of a new society in China from October 1949 up to 1976. We're going to begin by looking at a little bit of background of this key leader. So he first met Mao Zedong on the Jingjiangshan in 1928 after the leaders, the various communist leaders, had fled from the White Terror being exacted upon them by the Kuomintang and Zhang Jieshi. He played a key role on the Long March, and he was a brilliant commander during the Civil War as well. He was very close to Mao, but it was only in 1959 where he pretty much became Mao's most loyal and closest supporter. So he was appointed Defence Minister on the 16th of August 1959 after Peng Dehuai, and he replaced Peng Dehuai as Defence Minister, after Peng Dehuai had criticised Mao at the Lushan plenum for Mao's policies during the Great Leap Forward. Peng Dehuai had said they weren't working. Mao had said they were, and Peng Dehuai pretty much lost, and he was ostracised and replaced by Lin Biao. The other thing we need to understand about Lin Biao is that he suffered from a number of mental disorders. So you can see there he was a hypochondriac. He hated meeting people. He sweated profusely when he was forced to. He had an aversion to sunlight and wind. And indoors, he had to have the temperature maintained at 21 degrees centigrade. He also developed a morphine addiction while having medical treatment in the Soviet Union in the early 1940s. And as a consequence of all of these various disorders that he had, Mao referred to him contemptuously by the title Forever Healthy. So how did he contribute to the creation of a new society? Well, as I mentioned before, he was a key ally and he was a passionate supporter of Mao Zedong, particularly after the failure of the Great Leap Forward. And if you remember back to your history, and you should be up to it if you haven't done so, we'll talk about it now. After the failure of the Great Leap Forward, Mao was pushed aside pretty much as the leader of the country, and Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping led the country and implemented a number of policies to improve grain production and to stop the famine. Mao didn't like this for a number of reasons. One of the main reasons was he feared that these policies that Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping were implementing were capitalist in nature, and he feared that the revolution was being stopped by these policies. So he wanted to regain power. Lin was one of his main supporters and helped him to do this. So as I said, Lin was a passionate supporter of Mao Zedong. And here is a great example of demonstrating this support. So at the 7,000 Cadres Conference in January 1962, and this was an attempt to get rid of corruption within the CCP ranks, Lin stated in a speech, "The thoughts of the chairman are always correct," Chairman Mao Zedong. "If we encounter any problem, any difficulty, it is because we have not followed the instructions of the chairman closely enough." And Mao loved these thoughts, and he responded, "What a good speech Vice Chairman Lin has made. Lin Biao's words are always so clear and direct. They are simply superb. Why can't the other party leaders be so perceptive?" And those quotes come from Tom Ryan's China Rising. But it gives you a real insight into Lin's attitude towards Mao Zedong. The other key act of Lin Biao was that he compiled the Little Red Book in May 1964. And when it was first compiled, it was used primarily to instruct the PLA, the People's Liberation Army soldiers. They were forced to study it and were indoctrinated in Mao Zedong thought. And as a consequence of this, Mao's authority over the PLA strengthened, and his control or authority over the PLA was a key factor in enabling him, Mao, to regain power during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And I have a quote here from the foreword to the second edition of the Little Red Book, and I think it's very useful to give us a further insight into Lin's attitude towards Mao Zedong thought. So here it is. Comrade Mao Zedong is the greatest Marxist-Leninist of our era. He has inherited, defended, and developed Marxism-Leninism with genius, creatively and comprehensively, and has brought it to a higher and completely new stage. Mao Zedong thought is Marxism-Leninism of the era in which imperialism is heading for total collapse and socialism is advancing to worldwide victory. It is a powerful ideological weapon for opposing imperialism and for opposing revisionism and dogmatism. Mao Zedong's thought is the guiding principle for all the work of the party, the army, and the country. So that is the foreword to the second edition of the Little Red Book. Let us keep going. So further contributions of Lin Biao. So he was the most significant leader and the instigator of the Cultural Revolution, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, besides Mao Zedong himself and Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, who we're going to look at Jiang Qing in a later video. He helped Mao to re-establish his leadership over the CCP during the Cultural Revolution, not only through the use of the Little Red Book and indoctrination of the PLA, but through supporting Mao in his struggles against other leaders such as Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping. He was a key figure in the Four Olds campaign, which was a key campaign during the Cultural Revolution to get rid of non-communist, non-Chinese culture within China at the time. On the 18th of August 1966, Lin gave a long speech to young Red Guards asking them to destroy all old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits of the exploiting classes. Lin Biao also played a key role in the persecution of Liu Shaoqi and other CCP leaders such as Deng Xiaoping during the Cultural Revolution. And linked to the Little Red Book, he was a key promoter of the cult of Mao. So he promoted the readership of the Little Red Book and study classes of or in Mao Zedong thought, not only amongst the PLA, but also amongst the masses of the Chinese people. This cult was used to impose order and discipline, and Lin stated that the cult would unite the entire party, the entire army, and the entire people. This further strengthened Mao's leadership over the Chinese people and within China itself. So here are just a few key stats about Lin Biao's contribution to Chinese society at this time. So one of the real significant things was he was the driving force behind the compilation of the Little Red Book and the study of it in China. 40 billion copies of this Little Red Book were published during this time, enough for 15 copies for each man, woman, and child in China. The other key stat here is about some of the death tolls, the estimates of the number of people who died during the Cultural Revolution. Lin Biao, along with Mao Zedong, Jiang Qing, are responsible for what happened and for these deaths and for the suffering. So we can see there that it is estimated that 650,000 people died in the fighting of 1966-68, and that was just the fighting during or between the various Red Guard factions that was occurring at the time. And I got that stat from Jonathan Themby. And I have another quote here about the Cultural Revolution and Lin's attitude to the Cultural Revolution from Philip Short. And he writes, "The Cultural Revolution had provoked a collective demonstration of the worst instincts of a nation. Even Lin Biao in private dismissed it as a cultureless revolution." That's a nice, easy quote to remember for your historical interpretations. But Mao had other concerns. Revolution, he was fond of saying, was not a dinner party. The overriding priority was the perennity of class struggle. In the service of that cause, China had become a vast prison of the mind. The old world had been smashed, Mao had nothing to put in its place but empty red rhetoric. So that's a nice quote from Philip Short. I've got a couple of other historical interpretations about how Lin Biao contributed to the creation of a new society in China from October 1949 up to 1976. So let's have a look. The first one is from Philip Short again. And this is about Lin Biao himself. None of these eccentricities disqualified Lin from becoming Mao's successor. The role of party chairman was not executive but strategic. In Mao's eyes, Lin's supreme merit was that, ever since they had met on the Jingjiangshan in 1928, he had been a totally loyal follower. So there's a key part of the quote there. So that's why Mao liked Lin, because he was totally loyal. At this stage anyway, early on in the Cultural Revolution. He had a brilliant intellect. He was capable of articulating Mao's views with a cogency and clarity that none of the others could equal. Politically, he had the prestige that came from being the most brilliant of the communists' Civil War commanders. Ideologically, he adhered religiously to the precepts of Mao Zedong thought. But Lin was not a charismatic leader, and it must have been clear to Mao that he would need to be well seconded, well supported. Okay, and our second historical interpretation is about about Lin Biao as well, but it shows how Mao's attitude towards Lin actually shifted over the course of the Cultural Revolution and as it developed. Much as the chairman needed Lin Biao, he had tried to contain his growing influence over the years by fostering competing factions inside the army. But the heir apparent had triumphed at the Ninth Party Congress. The entire country was becoming militarised in an atmosphere of impending war with the Soviet Union or the United States. The army took over the government and ran the economy. Lin Biao enjoined the whole country to study Mao Zedong thought, which in effect meant that everyone was learning from the army. Mao himself was constantly surrounded by soldiers, and he suspected that they reported everything to their superiors. And here's the key point here. His hostility towards the grip the military had on his own life was turning into animosity towards Lin Biao and his generals. So there are a couple of contrasting historical interpretations about Lin Biao and Mao's attitude towards him. I hope you have found this video on Lin Biao useful for your study of the Chinese Revolution Area of Study 2, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.